Colonialism is actually worse than slavery. For as long as human beings have been around on this earth, there have always been slaves of some sort. And it's because human resource is the greatest and most valuable resource in the world. And in the beginning, slaves were mostly spoils of war. Like they would conquer a territory, and then they would take the women and children, some of the young men, and then they would take them to another nation totally, the nation of the conqueror, and then they would put them to work, building, farming, in the households, wherever labor was needed, they would make them readily available. And it evolved into people would go, middlemen were introduced. That's what I wanted to say. Middlemen were introduced. So there were people who would practically just go conquer nations specifically to get the people. So they would keep the animals and all the other treasures, but they would sell the people to other nations and territories that needed workers. And then it went on and on and on. And of course, the latest in history that most of us still remember, that was done on a grand scale, is what happened in the Americas and the Isles, the transatlantic slave trade. Now, let me tell you why I think colonialism is worse than slavery. Slavery was on the precept of, like the principle that governed slavery was, we as a greater and mightier people are conquering a lesser people. So the focus wasn't so much on changing the identity of the people, but on putting them to work. So slaves there would still be opportunity. They were left with hope. They would still remember their motherlands. They would still remember their customs and such and such. And then, once in a while, they would actually revolt, take down their masters, and then go back to their territory. Because they never messed with their minds, their beliefs, their customs. Largely, they were left intact. Colonialism, on the other hand, I think the earliest history of colonialism, if you are a Bible reader, then it was during the times of David. That you would go in, conquer territory, but you would leave their leadership basically intact. What you would do was you would introduce yourself as king of kings. Like they would keep their king, but you would become the king over their king. And so if you're looking at contemporary history, the earliest record of colonies is, I think, during the Roman Empire and conquests. They were never interested in taking back more people than they needed for labor and such, that they could repopulate their plebes. Anything extra they would live in the territories. And colonialism is sinister because when they take over a territory, they begin by changing your systems of governance. They corrupt your culture. They change your way of thinking. Basically, colonialism is mostly in the mind. Because by the time you're convincing people, they start by using fear. You're convincing people that they should work their lands, they should work their mines, that their children should be grown to work that same land and those mines and build so that they can profit their masters. It's quite sinister. And I think the latest record of colonialism is what happened in Africa, yeah? And we're seeing the effects of it until right now. Because many years later, after the colonialists left, and if you read their records, you'll actually realize that they were already planning, since World War I, they're already planning to hand over governance back to the colonies. So what we term as fight for independence, it was a combination of they wanted to be gone and we wanted them gone. It had become too expensive to keep their boots here. So they transitioned us to whatever system we have right now. And as I said in the video from yesterday, it's not yet Uhuru. We are not yet free. We just have an illusion of freedom. And it's because colonialism, it begins here. Imagine in such a short time they convinced us that our medicine was witchcraft. Right now they've rebranded it and they're selling it back to us. They convinced us that our ways of governance were mediocre to theirs. They convinced us that how we prayed, how we believed was demonic. They convinced us that even how we clothed ourselves and fed ourselves, that even our diet was inferior to them. And I think you can see signs and symptoms of that even right now in the society by some simple things like if your children speak their mother tongue, they're looked down upon by their peers or something of that sort. And colonialism is more sinister than slavery because at least slavery, you can see when the chains fall off. In colonialism, you cannot really see it. The most we have is a marker of transition to internal self-rule and then after that to independence. But truly, independence was not as independent as we all think it was. It was just they were taking a step back into the shadows. They did not really unhand us. They just like if someone is squeezing your throat like this, if they do this, it will feel like relief. And therefore, if it's in the dark, you might even assume they've taken their hand off. That's exactly what happened. And we see that right now, that colonialism really never left, because if you see, even in technology, there have been many civil suits against Apple, against Meta, in especially European countries. And the conflict has always been that they are overreaching. And it's because you realize anyone that can mess with your mind, with what you believe, with how you act, with your culture, with how you relate to people, then automatically they've colonized you. Because if I can predict, not just predict, if I can influence your behavior, your faith, your systems of governance and development, if I can influence how you think, how you act, how you feel, how you believe, then I own you. And that's what technology companies, in the fourth industrial revolution, I keep saying that it was never about computers. It was always about a more efficient way of managing human resource. Because even data is the most expensive commodity on earth right now. And it's from you and I. So yeah, colonialism, it never ended. And emancipation, true freedom will come from us having these kinds of conversations. I think in every one of my videos, I always say, let's keep the conversation going. I read most of the comments. I don't comment on most of them because I would have to take you to the beginning to teach you. But I'm confident that as I keep putting these videos out, slowly but surely we'll get to the point where we are all thinking independently for ourselves. And then from that point of power, that point of self-realization, self-awareness, and a faith that is based on fact, not just feeling, and a resolution that we are in charge and we are capable and we are willing to invest the resources necessary to bring change, not just for us, but for future generations, then I think that I will have done something with my life. I love you. Bye.